Good morning to everyone and good evening to Alice. So before we start, we'd like to introduce our board member, Alice Munyua from Kenya, to give us a few words. And I hope you're still awake and fresh to do so. So over to you.
Good morning, Johannesburg. Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be joining you from Los Angeles. As we all, we are in LA to recognize the 2017 Internet Hall of Fame inductees and also our 25 under 25 awardees. It's been such a great privilege to listen to these remarkable people. You also all know that we launched the Global Internet Report, which was largely a report reflecting a lot of your input. And we had very interesting discussions, which I hope you're going to continue there in Johannesburg. So I just want to wish you very good discussions and to step back and listen and contribute in any way that you let me. So I wish you all the best. Good morning and happy 25th anniversary to you all too. You're very important to the Internet Society. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Alice, for joining us, especially since it's so late that side. So we'll continue the celebrations here. And I'm sure Tato and the rest are very excited. So just taking over from what you're saying, we'd like to really recognize Mike Jensen, who was recognized as part of who was actually awarded to be part of the Internet Hall of Fame inductee. So I've had the chance to actually meet Michael when I used to work for APC, and I have to say he was the most laid-back person ever, but he actually does amazing work and is very humble. Just a little bit about Mike. So Mike is a South African. He's an independent ICT consultant and has established internet-based communication systems in more than 40 developing countries over the last 20 years, mainly in Africa. Mike works or consults for organizations like the World Bank, the UN, and continues to do a lot of work in Africa. So we really, really value the contribution that Mike does and continues to do. His recent projects at the moment include sort of offering advice on cross-border fiber provision in Africa, and also is currently developing a case study of national broadband development in Brazil. So Mike is a very busy man, even though he seems to keep a very happy face all the time. So congratulations to Mike, and I think we should all give him a round of applause. Another congratulation is obviously for the 25 under 25 awardees. And we have 8 from Africa, so that is very inspiring, especially for myself as a young person. So we'd like to extend our well wishes and congratulations to the 8 Africans who are there in LA right now, as well as to the other 25 under 25 participants. So can we also give them a round of applause? So for more information about these awards, please go to the Internet Society website and familiarize yourself, and maybe one day you'll also make it to the Internet Hall of Fame, or at least 25 under 25 if you still qualify. So thank you very much for that. And yeah, so we kick off the discussions, the panel. So today we're focusing on bridging the digital divide. And I'd like to invite Priya Chetty, who will sort of talk on points around the impact of digital divides on the digital economy, the role of government in bridging digital divides, the impact of cyber threats on the digital economy, and also digital inclusion in terms of youth and women. Priya is a dynamic young lady, not 25 though. She's got over 10 years of experience in the tech law industry. And she's a very well-respected person in the South African internet policy landscape. So, Priya, I invite you.
Good morning, everyone, and it's so great to be joining the celebrations here from Johannesburg. As I listened into some of the conversation coming in and the celebration and the tone of today, it seems as if everyone has a very personal connection to the internet, and it made me reflect that possibly everyone has their own internet story. And to introduce the discussion today, I wanted to share my own personal story as how I got hooked onto not only the internet, but the discussions on the digital divide. I was actually in a classroom where a professor from an international university was selling a master's course that was going to be offered for the first time in South Africa. in something called Internet Law and Policy. Now, if you've been studying law for a few years, you're familiar with the human rights rhetoric, you're familiar with the fields that you should go in to make a lot of money and resemble the lawyers on famous TV shows. But what on earth was Internet Law and Policy about, and why should one pursue a master's in this field? And what he ended up doing was switching off the lights and putting on the map, the very famous map that you'll remember from 15 years ago, that showed the lights on wherever the internet was and darkness wherever the internet wasn't. And I was literally overwhelmed. I was shocked and signed up for the master's course pretty much the next day. So we were sold on the fact that something needed to be done. And what we were sold at that point was that it was incumbent on all professions to join this debate, and that included lawyers. And 15 years later, here I am, and here we are, and I hope still fighting for access and opportunity. To return to the discussion and the reflection, I think something that has hit me when reading through some of the reports and looking at the history of the policies in South Africa is that we started out, not only in South Africa, but across the continent, with a huge emphasis being placed on policies and laws around access. And when we spoke about the digital divide, we imagined that access was the solution. And I think years on, we have discovered that access is only initiating the solution. And what we need now is detailed understanding of how we access opportunities that are enabled by the internet. And I think we have a better understanding of what that is. So we're looking at a maturity in the ecosystem of laws and policies in South Africa and in Africa that is translating the initial urgency around access to digital opportunities, or digitally led opportunities and digitally empowered opportunities. And as part of that ecosystem, we have matured that understanding to realize that it isn't just about cables, and it isn't just about devices, and it isn't just about internet speeds. It's also about other policies such as cybersecurity and privacy, and in a range of ways, how this ecosystem comes together to either promote or inhibit the opportunities that we would like to empower and see on the continent. So in a way, I think we've complicated things, because it isn't simply about lowering the price of access to the internet and getting devices in hands and so on. But now we have tried to uncover how this ecosystem comes together and what those set of indicators looks like. What we're also seeing across the continent is activity from regulators that we haven't seen before. For a long time, we have been critical of the regulators on the continent and the extent to which they participate effectively in this discussion and enable opportunities that we want to see. And if we take particularly the last 5 years, we see much more engaged regulators and much more engaged policymakers. What we also see, and today's event is an indication of that, is participation in the global communities that are having the important discussions. We have representatives, we have influencers, we have awardees, but our presence is felt outside the continent as people who are shaping internet policy globally, and as part of that, digital inclusiveness globally. Recently, I attended a Women in Tech in South Africa event, and I was floored by the discussions around the continuing challenges. Obviously, as a woman myself, I'm aware of the challenges as they are felt in my own communities and in my own experience. But a sense of urgency is also being created around digital inclusiveness, not just in the universal sense, but particularly emphasizing communities that have not had the opportunities that others have had. And I think that that subject is a dynamic subject. There's a lot of fluidity in it. But I think even in today's discussion, we must again emphasize that there are communities that need more attention and focus than others. Thanks, Yolanda.
Thank you so much, Priya, for that opening remarks. Just to follow on, we have Mr. Walter Brown, who is also a very well-respected person within the ICT sector in South Africa. He's got a very extensive experience with more than 50 years under his belt. So over to you, sir.
Thank you. I wish you could use your digits to try to anticipate the traffic on the roads of Johannesburg. That would be very helpful. Or else, now, hang on. I was about to say, push it forward to honor the very old people like myself, but most of you are young anyway, so that doesn't apply. But thank you very much. I had a bit of a presentation because, you've asked me to talk about digital inclusion for youth and women. And the only way I can do that is with numbers, the hardcore statistics. And following on to what Priya said, everything I agree with, by the way, but the first thing that I will observe is that the onus the internet is a technology that was invented, in the early 60s. It's been with us for a long time. Every single nation has it. We all know it. And yet we still treat it as if it's a new discovery. Are we discovering the internet or are we applying it? We have good discussions about the cost to communicate. I think I delivered a paper sometime in 2011, in Soweto, about the cost to communicate. And every year we recreate this year. I've worked with the ICT industry a long, long time. And, as you mentioned, I've been around for a long time. Talking to people like Vodacom, MTN, just very recently, by the way, I worked with the SACF, where we had to serve those organizations that provide useful services. And then one thing that I said to MTN, for example, we're having a quiet discussion. I said, we've been trying to talk about this cost to communicate for a very long time. There are 30 million South Africans that are earning under the upper bound poverty line, which is what? It was 779 Rand a month. The Statistician General has just moved it up to about 1,300 Rand. Now we've got 30 million people trying to afford MTN services. How low can you bring MTN, Vodacom, Telkom, Cell C services in order to meet their capability? It's impossible. And then we go back and say, right, we will deal with it with policy issues. We will look at the policy framework. We will look at the white paper. And we will deal with the WOAN. Though it used to be a wholesale open access, it slowly became the wireless open access because, our industry is dominated by the mobile services. Will the WOAN provide services that people that are earning, families that are earning 779 Rand a month, be able to afford? Clearly the answer is no. Last week, by the way, I had a similar discussion with ICASA. ICASA, they have to regulate the industry, but which industry? The industry that we know that it's in our face. But what about the industry that is trying to say, my topic is digital inclusion for youth and women. Well, the first thing that disappoints me is digital. You know what? Digital is a technology of modulation. All of a sudden, it's the thing. When I see you in front of me, I don't see digits. I see analog. When I'm speaking through this microphone, you're hearing with your ears, analog. And yet, we've got the digital songs, we've got digital everything else. Digital is just a tool to enable us to communicate. So, fine, that's the first criticism, a bit of a criticism on the naming of the digital inclusion. We should be calling it knowledge inclusion, maybe inclusion into the information society. The World Summit on the Information Society was born in 2004, I think it was in Tunis, and we're still talking about it in 2017 and not making any inroads. I think we should start looking at what we are trying to do, how we are trying to do it, maybe redefine all our understanding of this industry. I'll divert a little bit. I think it was in 2005 or 2006 or something like that, the DTI asked me to write a small presentation, or rather a small article, in a trade mission they were mounting to Japan. So I said, what about? He says, no, anything you want about the ICTs. So guess what? I said, right, ICTs were invented in Africa. Guys, can wake up. ICTs were invented in Africa, by the way. They might not have been electronic, but what was the African talking drum doing, too long ago that we had? It was communicating over distance. Now the world tells us, no, there's a difference between telecommunications and the internet. The internet is special, it's not telecommunications. Tele means distance, communications means sharing of ideas. So the internet is not that. These are the things that and by the way, what I'm trying to say, how does it impact youth and children and women? Do they care what we call the stuff? Or do they want the information that they can derive from the networks that we've created? Let's look at children. Did you know that 63% of South Africa's children are in the poverty traps? Living with, first and foremost, we also know that after 50 years of research, a child living in poverty damages their brain cells, physically so, to the extent that the shock of being poor makes them uncompetitive. Their cognitive capacity is reduced physically, and we are sitting with 63% of our children in that space. And we want to talk about what we are meeting together. I'll come to the Tshimologong just now. But if we don't come back and change our ideas and look at poverty instead of ICTs, we've been trying to provide public facilities for a very, very long time. We've had the telecenters. There have been studies throughout the world about telecenters, and we've all concluded that they've been a failure. USASA is still investing hordes and hordes of money into the telecenter concept. Why? We have this belief that technology will be the solution. We've made the objective the technology, not the people. What we should be doing is making the children, youth, and women. If we have to look at some of the statistics that are prepared for you guys, they are actually shocking. First and foremost, we all praise South Africa, we all love our country, and we understand that it's the biggest economy, or was the biggest economy on the continent of Africa. And yet, we are #1 in the whole world, in all measures of inequality, by the way. It's that sort of thing. We are almost #1 in terms of poverty. When we start comparing South Africa's poverty level to Haiti, I think we could wake up. And at the same time, if we don't acknowledge our shortcomings are going to kill us. We could be moving towards a failed state. Here we are, a few years ago, we, as SACF, we get a request from the TTPS, I can't remember if it was DOC then, to write the latest chapter on the WISIS program of the country, do the country analysis. So we do that. We delved into it with great enthusiasm, picked up everything else, and guess what happens? We say, no, you can't say that. It puts us in a bad light. You can't find anything that makes us look good and put it in your report. Do you know what? South Africa was heading the HIV and AIDS pandemic, one of the global leaders. Why? Are we hiding away from it? Coming back to this whole idea, the ICT industry, broadband, the internet, you name it, is a tool to enable our children and our youth to progress and become competitive, not only in South Africa, but in the whole world. That's what it's there for. Why are we busy, regulating the technology? Why are we so techno-deterministic? I think that's a word for it, Can we refocus our whole ideas and say, what about the people? What about the children? If we think about the level of children that will not make it, that they will move into, I've got a film, by the way, if you want, I've got the links to the film and so forth, to find out what the majority of South Africa's children are doing for their lives. They're going to move into the nyope of business, smoking, crime. Why? Because they have no opportunity. I think it's frightening. When you look at our school system, by the way, there's a statistic that, again, is very, very alarming. The fundamentals of everything, by the way, is not just technology or engineering, or math and science. If you don't have that, you're not able to actually reason logically at all, right? So, and where are we in terms of math and science? We are still called last in the whole world. We are, South Africa. We've got bright people, we can see them in front of us over here, that will excel in our Model C schools, that will do well in university. We've got a youngster, by the way, I think it's from the Eastern Cape, that's at NASA, driving our, researchers into outer space. We've got that. But what about the majority? 63%. Where are they? If we are stone cold last in the international measures of science and mathematics, where will our children be in the future then? The majority of our children. That's what makes the nature. The future is in the hands of youngsters, the youth. And the mothers are equally important. If we look at the exclusion of women and the abuse of women in this country, then you understand what are the tools. We have the tools here, but if we focus attention and make the tools objective, we will lose the plot. The tools, the ICT tools, the internet and everything else we talk about, ISOC, we are in this ISOC premises here. Their focus should be not on the internet, but on the people that use the internet. This is how we should try to change it. Take our host here, the Tshimologong Center, a wonderful institution, vital, necessary, absolutely, essential. We have to move up the chain. But now if we look at the number of people that go through the center each year, we look at the 63% population of children that are completely outside the loop. We say, are we making a difference? In actual fact, I would suggest that the success at Tshimologong, and there are many others like it, by the way, you've got the Innovation Hub and you've got everything else, What they're doing, they might even be fueling our inequality. A few success stories from here, while we forget the masses that are sitting at the base of the pyramid, is going to be destructive. So what we need, in actual fact, is, you want me to stop? Don't worry. I've been around for 50 years and I've got a big story to tell you. The center each year. We look at the 63%. I don't sound like that. It wasn't me. Yeah. All right, let me wind up now.
Okay.
Yeah. At the end of the day, what we should be doing is looking at centers like Tshimologong, looking at the Innovation Hub, looking at what CEDA and those people are doing, and say, guys, we need to multiply them by 1,000. Yeah. That's what we need to do. Every single university should have 1, 2, 3 Tshimologong centers in the areas where they need it most, in the poverty-stricken areas. Coming into Joburg, man, it was a nightmare for me, What about the kids outside? Of course, the well-to-do children will find it very easy. But we are talking about the 63% of children that have got zero opportunity. If we can just keep that in mind, if we don't focus on them, by the way, the future of South Africa is very dismal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walter. And I think like what you're saying, even though it was quite long, it is very valid. And we're here today because of that, right? We want to shape the next 25 years. At least the hashtag is shape tomorrow. And I guess we all know the problems. We can all point them out. And even there was a movement right now, data must fall. So the youth are involved in the discussions. I guess the bigger point is what next? And my question to Priya is, we speak about access and how it's not enough. So what is beyond access look like? What are the type of strategies that we need to put in place to make sure that being online does not just mean being online, but to actually make a living out of it, or for it to be a benefit? So that's my question to Priya. And I guess my question to Mr. Walter is, the problems are there. What are the solutions? And I'm also opening up the floor to questions, if anyone else has questions.
Morning. My name is Miepi. I'm one of the startup incubated by Tshimologong. I just want to ask maybe the question to Priya. In terms of access to internet and connectivity, especially in the rural areas where mainly I'm focused in terms of enabling those citizens with technology to better their livelihood. How do you then, guys, assist startups or SMEs that are focused in that space to get that rollout going quickly, and especially when it comes to government, because I think our government is so reluctant to use technology to improve their services?
If you don't mind, then I'll just project. I think coming back to the first question, and remember that my lens is from a legal and policy perspective, and Walter's frustration mirrored itself in my world when I read through policy documents and legal instruments and look for the solutions and find that there are gaps that we should be. So in terms of how we consider a way forward from a policy perspective, we need to be asking questions about some of the more recent decisions we've made. So for instance, in South Africa, we have cybersecurity policies that prioritize national state surveillance and put in place measures for internet, and I know that the term shutdown is a powered term, but for measures where we would have the capacity to reduce internet access where we find national threats. And if we look at the criticism of some of the cybersecurity policies and laws that we've found, people have said, is this censorship, and does this create, does it pave a way for unfettered discretion to limit access to the internet? Similarly, if we look at privacy legislation, we can ask the question as to whether unreasonable limitations have been placed on the processing of specifically personal information. If we understand digital economies and the way that they work today, understanding the originator of transactions, understanding what people are doing online is what fuels our ability to extract benefits from a digital economy. And to the extent that we place limitations on what we can do with personal information that may be overreaching, we need to reconsider these approaches as well. And then just to give you another example, we are currently at the moment in South Africa in a flux when we consider how intellectual property will be governed in the future. And without getting into the detail, I think what we need to do is cast a similar lens as to whether we regulate copyright in a way that is conducive to the sharing of information and ideas online, or whether it is overly restrictive. And I think using legislation and policy in that way to not only promote the benefits of the subject itself, but to look beyond that, as Walter has ushered us to do, look beyond that to see what the effects might be on the broader communities as they enter into the opportunity space when it comes to the internet. I think that's going to be crucially important. Coming to the question of the rural areas and entry again into opportunities that are digitally empowered. For me, there is still a huge mismatch between the skills that we would need in order to access opportunities that are digital economy focused, knowledge economy focused, and the skills we are currently presented with. So a detailed review of curriculum, not only at the university level, because that's not where everyone might find themselves, but also at all the tertiary institutions across the landscape, from the 1 month course to the 12-month course to the 2-year programs, all the way into degrees, a current reflection on whether those programs are serving the skills that we need is going to be crucial. And then, of course, when we, I find myself to be one of those people that has not only bridged, the journey from poor to middle class, etc., but also somebody who's bridged having no understanding. So I was one of those people that started the master's program, having been at a university where lawyers did not have access to computers. And so while my counterparts were sitting in a room and easily finding information online, I had to ask the question as to how to use a browser on day 1 of the course. And so what I find is that an understanding of the rules at play, such as access to funding, what is the IDC, for instance, and what is the Department of Trade and Industry doing in this space? What is this precinct and who does it empower? what are the opportunities at the smallest scale, and then as one grows an entrepreneurship enterprise that one can access in order to empower themselves within the opportunity landscape that we find ourselves. I think Walter has really challenged us this morning to place focus on whether the solutions we speak about address the different levels of the pyramid, or whether we are focused on success stories. And I think the same challenge is presented to myself when we think about the laws and regulations as we try to hit different subjects and cure certain problems. Are we really addressing the bigger picture, and are we promoting greater opportunities in this landscape?
Thank you, Priya. I think I came with a bad attitude this morning, and I'm going to say sorry about that. But no, what Priya says is absolutely correct. There is a qualification. Everything. Remember, we're looking at a complex scenario. Many cases, you choose the right path and you move up it, and you find there's another thing that you've forgotten that's pulling you back. So it's a very complex issue. I'm just looking at what Priya just said right now. Yes, cybersecurity is extremely important. Regulation is extremely important, but out of 45 million South Africans, 6.5% of them have internet at home. So guess what? We're going to police it, right? We're going to create cybersecurity for the majority that don't even have it yet. Are we going to suppress them or not? Now, just as one thing to say that we should expand our thinking greatly to understand exactly what we are doing. Of course, we want to stop top-level criminals that are messing around, you know, the KPMGs of this world and so forth in the news right now and so forth, you know. But at the end of the day, if we look at the majority of our people, I tell you what, let them play, let them steal even if they have to. Remember something, I've got a wonderful, sorry, I'm going back to sign on my age, Jane Goodall, she studied monkeys, by the way, in the bush, you know. You find that if there's a pile of monkeys, there's a little one that's not getting the bananas, you know, they'll run into the bush and make a noise and distract the big guys and come back and steal the bananas while the other guys are. We have to allow our children to steal technology if we need to. Yeah, that's the one thing. Now, you asked a question about the SMMEs and the rural areas. You're a graduate of this center, this precinct over here. I tell you what, we talked about SMMEs. It's a crying shame, and we do nothing about them. First and foremost, there is no challenge, technological challenge to connecting anywhere at all. There's none. It comes back with the kind of policies that you take the rural areas, for example. I looked at a huge amount of expenditure. USASA, who got MTN, is there a representative from MTN today here? I don't know. But to help them, to connect them, Singa, 2G, you know, we all clapped our hands and it was delivered. And then you look at them, Singa. Do you know what? Is there a telecom representative? They're my brothers, by the way. I grew up with these guys. There's a telecom fiber going right through the village of Musinga, and you can't use it. So guess what? We got a technological challenge. The next thing is, if we look at our power grid owned by Eskom, the tentacles fit into nearly every village. Has anybody thought how simple, how cheap, how quick it would be to string a fiber on an existing power line? Well, no, we don't want to do that. SMMEs, I tell you what, at the end of the day, what we want to do, we want SMMEs that will create new million rand industries and so forth. You know, the average turnover for SMMEs in South Africa, I think, is about less than R1 million per annum. But what we need is millions of them. The failure rate for SMMEs, by the way, is about 95% or something like that in South Africa. You'll be lucky. If you succeed, we must all celebrate. But what about the 95% that haven't? What kind of environment have we to make sure? By the way, that same failure rate happens at Silicon Valley. So what's the difference between Silicon Valley and South? There's a fundamental difference. They have an environment to pick up the guys and say, try again. We bury our failures. You know, that's one thing. Next thing is, we've got colleagues here, ZSERC, welcome you guys, you know, at the end of the day. But you want to connect the rural areas. I mentioned two things. Number one, telecom is everywhere, but we can't use it. Number two, we've got Eskom everywhere, and it's cheap to provide fiber on there. Number three, we're talking about the wireless open access and so forth. We're going to have a single the WO1 network, I think that's what the plan is at the moment. Have you people looked at the value of the radio frequency spectrum that's currently used, the so-called digital divide? If we took, for example, just only the 700 meg band and say, we will devote that to promoting SMMEs, I'll tell you what, will there some SMMEs flying to every corner, not only just the rural areas, but right now. What regulations are stopping us from doing that at the moment? What policies are stopping us? Then your agenda should be to change the policies. At 700 megs, guys, we all know, those that are engineers around here, you can reach up to 300 kilometers. Or if you got a clear path, of course. If you got a mountain, you can make a plan. But you can connect Msinga directly from Durban with fairly cheap, off-the-shelf wireless networks. And by the way, when you get there, this is an argument that I had with Vodacom that I think that you guys must understand. In fact, I was talking to the CEOs, and he didn't listen very much. This whole idea of individual connectivity is completely wrong. You cannot have people that are trying to survive on less than 1,000 rand a month, whole families, to have individual broadband connections. But there's a solution. You know, in I think it was 1886 or something like that. You see how old I am. I remember these things. But in 1886, when they first brought in the telephone and prior to that the telegraph, guess what they had? People couldn't afford it, so they had public call boxes. When the broadband age, have public call boxes. And by the way, they are very, very cheap. They're already here. They're everywhere in town. If you want to see public internet access, go down to the nearest shopping complex. You walk into a postnet and you'll use their cyber cafe. Guess what? The only problem is, why are they in the high income areas? Why are you paying what, 60, I think it's about 60 rand an hour, something like that, you know? You've got a Nigerian downtown or a Pakistani even, you know, that can offer you service at 3 rand an hour. Now that makes sense. If Vodacom wants to charge me 1,000 rand, by the way, Vomatel is launching some services into the townships at 100 megabits per second fiber, they pay 89 rand a month. Brilliant, even 89 rand a month is too much because they can't afford the PCs and so forth. So guess what? Use that, and I'm hoping to talk to Vomatel. Use that in our high density areas for the poor and say, right, 100 megabits per second, mass sharing, big internet cafes. There's your public call box. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think you actually gave us some of the solutions that we should actually come together and sort of address these issues. Tato, Mr. Tato has something to say.
Thank you, Linda. I think for me, when looking at the term digital divides, we also need to understand that there are other factors that are making sure that is that particular digital divide, like your social and economic challenges, especially here in South Africa, whereby you find the majority of South Africans still not being able to access internet and use it in a meaningful way, because there's a lot of opportunity in people being involved in the digital space. That's why we need to see a lot of young people and women participating in the internet governance discourse to actually understand what is this internet governance about holistically, not necessarily being someone who pushes certain processes, not necessarily understanding what are the ins and outs of the industry, because once you've got a holistic understanding, then it's much easier for people to come up with their own concepts, identify gaps that they can actually close. As what I mentioned, that science and maths, there needs to be a lot of investment. Because if you go to the internet, for instance, you find that a lot of content that is available in there, it's not necessarily locally produced. So these are some of the challenges of which are contributing to the digital divide, the languages that are used on the internet. As much as affordability is one of them, languages also play a critical role. And skills is one of those important factors that enable people to actually participate meaningfully. But now, when we're talking about what could be done, looking at government, there is something that they can do, especially in regards to engaging the internet community in terms of policy, make sure that whatever policy that has been set, it is inclusive and it also takes into consideration other players within the space. But now, looking at South Africa, we also have a situation whereby we see the ICTs being monopolized. And that monopolization of ICTs, it makes it difficult for people to actually participate. Because for internet access to be affordable, I don't think it requires a lot. It just needs understanding from government and the private sector. And then coming to the issue of cybersecurity, I think cybersecurity is very important as it affects digital trust. Because nowadays you see that a lot of transactions are done online, but now if there is no digital trust, it's very difficult for businesses to excel online and actually do transactions with customers on the ground. So I think there's still a lot that needs to be done in regard to working very close with internet service providers and your content providers, even your network operators, to actually see how can we best protect this resource called the internet. Because to some people, the internet means life. It means an opportunity to get education, an opportunity to get employment. Because if we look at the current level of unemployment currently here in the country, it's very high. But with the accessibility and affordability of the internet, I think a lot of challenges could be addressed within the country. So I'm not going to be long, but in a nutshell, I think entrepreneurship and innovation are very critical. And in order to enable that, we need to make sure that not only English speakers or Chinese speakers are able to use the internet, people using different languages. Because based on the research that we've actually gone through, that was developed by AC Nielsen, it's looking at a 17-year trend in terms of the languages that are used on the internet. And what we found out is that the English language and the Chinese language are highly ranked, whereby they constitute about 40 to 50% of the languages that are used on the net. So whenever you see those kind of things, you will also see evidence that there is more innovation, but those people who are speaking those particular languages. So we need to start introducing languages so that people who cannot necessarily relate or express themselves on the language that is commonly used in the internet, they can start learning from it, contributing onto it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tata, for those contributions. And I think, they come so timely, especially at a time where we have hashtags like Internet for All. And when we talk about Internet for All, we're really meaning that everyone should be able to access the internet, but also to understand the internet. I'm also opening up the floor to any more questions to the panelists, including what Tata just said right now. Going once? Okay.
Okay, I just wanted to find out on this project. Do you think? Okay, all right, there we go. All right, so I just want to find out, do you think that there is a lot of, like the tech space and internet gets a lot of unnecessary pressure from everybody to kind of solve all of the problems that are happening in the country? I feel as though it is always like, no, but there's, there's technology, there's internet, maybe there's somebody that can innovate and create a solution. So that's kind of my question. And also, I kind of feel like, the internet has been here for a long time. And there's been a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to innovate and do stuff, but yet we still see the kind of the same, the unemployment rates, the poverty, and so on and so forth. Sorry, that's just my opinion.
Morning.
Hello? Does it work?
Yeah, it works. Morning.
Okay, so I sort of have two questions. My name is Michuki Mwangi from the Internet Society. I was last year or early this year, I read a report that shows that 65% of the jobs that the children in schools will take up are actually yet to come into existence. And so how do we prepare them to be able to take up those jobs? Because if they're not prepared, it goes back to what was mentioned earlier with respect to increasing the digital divide. How do we prepare them to be able to address, take up these jobs or create those jobs? Because if those jobs don't exist now, it means they're the ones who will be responsible for creating them. And then the second question I have is, there was an article yesterday on the Huffington Post, which is looking at the status of internet access in South Africa. And one of the things which struck me there was the fact that there are 29 million smartphones in South Africa, but only 21 million people are accessing the internet once per month. So that means that there's a gap of about 8 million people with smartphones that are not able to access the internet monthly. And the question is why? Is it the relevance of the internet? What is creating that divide, that they have the access, but they're not really actually getting online? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
I think there was a last question this side.
Yes, please. Thank you. My name is Matsilani from IT Web Africa. I have one question for Priya following your presentation there regarding whether how far along you think we've come if we want to go beyond access. So once we achieve access, how far along come that in that regard, and what that we need to do beyond access. So what will the internet be used for as soon as we've achieved that milestone of whatever extent of access we want to ensure? Thanks.
Just before you answer, so while you're answering, I guess you should also do your closing remarks as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Those are such exciting questions with such exciting answers. I think that on the first question about the pressure placed on technologists, I had a conversation 2 days ago with someone who said that are people who are part of the digital community now the new jocks or the new celebrities? And in a way, it resembles the pressure that is placed on us. But on the other hand, it says, all eyes on you. What can you do? You have been identified as people with an inclination or an interest to do very well in this field. And what do you do with that talent now that you've been identified and you've been profiled and you have this following, to use a social media term? With all eyes on you and that kind of pressure, what do you do with it? And I think that the answer is as diverse as the question, because the skills in the space and the talents that we find within the digital arena are so diverse that what people come up with are not only, economically viable or produce those kinds of results, but also addressing what Tato mentioned about the socioeconomic opportunities, finding solutions that are unique, innovative, and can only come from someone who's been plagued with a kind of burning question, and that is context relevant, that is perhaps South African or perhaps African as a problem set. So yes, there is pressure, but the big question is, what do you do with it? On the issue of the skills we will need and that we don't know of, someone I know works for the African Leadership Academy, and they are on a very exciting mission to, every year, they find the top 200 young people across the continent, and they put them on a leadership program for 2 years. And this is an extreme acceleration program. And what they are teaching is, in addition to the ordinary curriculum that one must meet in order to get into universities and so on, they are teaching attributes of resilience and leadership and emotional intelligence and entrepreneurship. And because what we know is that having talented entrepreneurship can be applied in any field. Having the ability to be resilient and define jobs and define how something should be done can be applied in any field. And what is amazing is how students who enter the academy, sometimes without having the ability to speak English, with not having had exposure to maths teachers and so on, the accelerated learning and excellence and leadership that they then demonstrate in Ivy League universities across the world are making them SRC presidents, are making them awardees of a maths award, and so on, having come in with, you know, a below average grade in maths when they started the academy. So I think that curricula for the new age, for the age that we can't see, needs to be adapted to include leadership elements across the board. These attributes of leadership and emotional intelligence and so on.
Sorry, Priya, we're running out of time. So we just have literally 1 minute left.
Yeah, so I think for me, just to wrap up, I think, you know, it's a time of great opportunity. And so let's not only, you know, preach that we need resilience for our young people, but let's try and practice it ourselves in order to try and further that goal. Yeah.
The last 30 seconds.
Okay, very quick one. Your question, ma'am. The internet, is it failing us or not? I would say that the internet is worthless. I mean, the internet society, it's absolutely valueless whatsoever. It does nothing for us until you put the content in. It's the content that's of value, not the internet, not the gizmos and so forth, you know. Knowledge is derived via the internet. You know, the way that we deal with the internet is like if the old way of imparting knowledge was the book. So we're going to analyze the tree that the paper was made from and the ink and so forth. That's what we're doing here, in effect. The user is king. If we can get that into our site, then we will position the internet to provide good for everybody else. Your question, 65% of jobs are yet to be invented. Absolutely. And who's going to invent them? We. Do we know? We don't even know what they are. We don't even understand the needs of the children. The fourth industrial revolution is coming along here. It's going to decimate jobs. We know. The whole world of labor, we've got to have a new understanding of what labor is. With the image, your artificial intelligence issues, robotics and what have you, they will do it. So my recommendation would be to come back and say, we don't know the answers, but we can set the environment for the answers to. We can start with the children, let them play games on the internet, let them start learning. In actual fact, one of this institution's mandates is to get games, learning games developed. Now, thank you. Start at 6 years old, like Paul Kagame of what you call it. And I think the rest of them have been answered pretty much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I feel like it feels like a CNN report, right? You have to just cross over to the next side because you have to shortly cross over to Brussels. But just to wrap up, I think what really came out today was that bridging the digital divide takes us. And the internet in itself is not the solution, but that we create the content, or at least we are the ones that shape the environment for the internet or ICT to basically make our futures better. I also like what Tato said around language and access, in the sense that the internet should not be an elitist platform. Everyone from every different types of corners should be able to access the internet. And also, not only language, but also rural areas. We should not just overlook certain parts of the world just because it benefits us. So I guess in essence, it calls for a greater effort. The problems are there, but I think as humankind, we are also there to tackle this beast, because the internet in itself is not a person, but